Fire is a good thing, as in power when controlled. However, fire nor power is a good thing when uncontrolled. In part 1 of our series, we discovered that all leaders are not good leaders and that you have to measure their effectiveness based on their impact to their followers. Niccolo Machiavelli is noted for his writings about power and the need for those in control to maintain power at all costs. He posited that authority does not necessarily lead to a leader having power, suggesting that being good or honest doesn't make a difference when dealing with the concept of leadership and power. If an injury has to be done to a man, it should be so severe that his vengeance need not be feared. Vlad the Impaler, during his reign of terror, wanted to quell any attempts at insurrection. He was noted to have invited guests to a dinner where he would order them to be stabbed and have their bodies impaled on stakes. He also became upset when a group of visitors refused to remove their turbans, citing religious reasons. He ordered to have their turbans nailed to their skulls. I'm not interested in preserving the status quo. I want to overthrow it. In January of 2021, a mob of President Trump loyalists converged on the White House in hopes of changing the trajectory of democracy. They had been fueled by the delusional rantings of a president who had lost his re-election bid. Thinking they could overturn the election by storming the Capitol while the electoral votes were being counted, America watched in horror as thousands of people stormed the Capitol in defense of their leader, who was nowhere to be found. For in truth, there is no sure way of holding other than by destroying. Saddam Hussein is known for human rights violations against his own people. It is known that he refused to allow human rights monitors from the United Nations to enter his country. Reports of women being assaulted while in Iraqi custody were common. Saddam believed that prostitution was punishable by death, and he ordered the death of a mother whose sons had defected. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. Adolf Hitler is credited as being the most notorious dictator of the 20th century. Under his reign, he directed the death of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims simply because he convinced his people that their race was superior to others and that therefore they should be exterminated. His goal was the genocide of the Jewish people. He almost succeeded. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. Idi Amin, the former president of Uganda, was responsible for the massacre of over 300,000 civilians during his reign. He also bragged about being a cannibal, saying human flesh was not for him because it was too salty. He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command. Kim Jong-un, the current ruler of North Korea, had his uncle executed. Since taking power, he has directed the increase of nuclear capability in Korea. This threatens not only his own people, but the rest of the world. And here comes in the question whether it is better to be loved rather than feared, or feared rather than loved. It might perhaps be answered that we should wish to be both.
and you don't worry about it anymore. No one wants to deal with it. It's just like, it's every setting you see toxic followership, every setting for different reasons. You see people, in the book I mentioned about the colluders and the conformers, and they have different roles. So the colluders are that inner circle that most trusted by that bad leader, that destructive leader, right? But they're doing this for their own desires, right? They want to get something out of it. So I'm going to do whatever they say just because I'm going to get paid.
Because he gives me good bonuses. I get a
yes,
good
I'm going to be able
okay.
to get close to him. I'm going to have some extra privileges somehow. The conformers, on the other hand, are not a part of the inner circle, but they are loyal to this bad leader out of fear. Kind of like, well, if I don't, what's going to happen? So they begin to adhere to everything that this leader says and wants them to do, and never even, it just totally dismisses what they want out of life. They no longer adhere to their own values, and they're following someone who is totally morally bankrupt. And so what, there's so many things that really allow a bad leader to rise. And one of those we talk about, as we in the book I mentioned about the conducive environment, right? Anytime there's a crisis, that's the perfect storm, right? That's the perfect environment for a bad leader to rise up, because I'm going to have reform. We're going to change this. We're going to make it right. I'm going to do that. I alone am going to do this. And so you have to really think about, is that person raising up for what? To gain some sort of power.
I remember reading that in the entire state of Indiana, him and his wife were the first couple to adopt an African-American child, and how that was celebrated and how much publicity was around that. And I think that was part of his shaping that persona, so people could think I'm just like you, or saying, I'm part Cherokee because of the dark hair when he was Welsh, and at some point starts saying he was Black. And right. People clearly can see he's not Black, but it was that charisma that he had, the ability to make his own reality. And people believe that because they said, well, that's just how he is.
That's exactly right. Making excuses.
Now, what would you think happened? And I just, again, because I'm still astounded when we talk about the followership of all these people leaving the United States and going to South America. Do you really think that the African Americans at that time thought, well, you know what, anything's better than the US because we're not really valued in this country, or maybe they felt they weren't valued. Let's just try something else. That was such an extreme thing to do, but I think he spoke to that to them to say, I can give you a better life. And they believed that.
There are videos. In conducting my research, I went to the San Francisco Historical Society, spent a lot of time there. And there are videos that, promo videos, where he is saying, this is a wonderful life. Look at the fruit, look at here, it's all waiting for you. But we also have to understand that everyone that was invited, it was not under very good conditions. So everybody did not go willingly. Everyone did not go willingly. There were those who had family members over there they didn't want to be separated from. Some people didn't have choices. That's the level of control that he had over the members of the church.
Did any of the members of the focus group ever talk about the public beatings? They said that happened even before Jonestown, at the People's Temple. You would be publicly ridiculed in front of the congregation if you did something, including going to sleep.
They did. They were very graphic about the depiction of those types of punishments. And that's what we know is a form of control. We know that that's that hard power. Those are those threats, that coercive power, where if you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. If you do this, as they have done, this is what's going to happen to you. So it's the public display to continue to get people to believe, now you see who I am. Now you see the level of power that I have. You will be obedient. It's really a way to keep people conforming to the rules, the horrible rules of that organization.
So what themes did you see emerge from all of them when you did the focus group? Were there some things that just all of them were just spot on or felt that they wanted you to hear?
There were so many. And one that comes to mind is the power of make-believe. So we always pretend. So we are coming up on October, and we know that we're going to see a lot of people pretend to be something or someone on October 31st. And even as kids, it was, well, I'm gonna make believe I'm a go-go dancer. I'm gonna make believe I'm a fairy princess. I'm gonna make believe I'm a witch. Any of those seems like kids' fun, right? Something that's harmless. But think of the words, the power of make believe. I'm going to make you believe I am who I say I am. I'm going to be this person. I'm going to make sure that you call me father. And the more you hear it, the more you begin to believe it. And so no matter what you see, you hear that I am what? Father.
Father.
Because everybody else is calling me that too. And so that is a level of control to get someone to believe. It's pure deception. So everything that he displayed publicly about himself was all a facade. It wasn't real, because everybody saw those public beatings. They saw that there was not enough food over in Jonestown. They saw that there were people who were not getting fair treatment. There was this whole display of the inner circle having no African Americans, but we're family, remember?
Wow.
What's absent? Black people. There were no African Americans in his trusted circles.
Wow.
So he was able to really have that whole power of make believe, not only on the members. Let's be real about that too. It was the government.
Because he had such influence.
Well.
Yeah, he's had such influence.
And
they invited him into their circles because
they invited him into his circles. That's right. And so when you look at the pictures and you see him beside these figures, this is like, oh, even I think to some extent, having conducted the research, that there was a sense of when Leo Ryan went over, that they really went unprepared. And I really believe that they thought they were able to go and on this mission, have this conversation, check on everyone, and come back safely. They really did believe that. It's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking to see that Congressman Ryan lost his life on a good deed. At the request of family members saying something is wrong.
It states in some of the research that he even had the officials in Guyana fooled as well, and that they clearly turned a blind eye to what he was doing.
Sure.
Do you think he studied? It's interesting because when you look at some of his behaviors, I compare them, they were very Machiavellian. Do you think he actually studied to learn the manipulative things that he did? Because he was an educated man.
I do think that at some point, but when it began to work for him, I don't think he studied that piece. I think probably prior to that, I have no evidence of that in my research, but because he has 2 degrees, I'm sorry, past tense, had 2 degrees, that at some point there was some reading or something, study being done. But I think that once he realized that this was working for him to be able to have a level of control over people, that he just continued, unfortunately.
Well, Dr. Edmonds, your book is fantabulous, and I'm going to make sure that I put it up on the screen so everyone can see it and they can purchase it, because I think you give a very interesting description of how leadership can go off circle and how followership can go off circle, that if people are ignoring the alarms that are going off in their heads, if they know something's not right, but they're pursuing anyway, it's kind of like that. We always talk about everybody's going to Abilene and nobody knows why. Then we all get there and we're like, well, none of us really wanted to come. You know, it's kind of the Abilene paradox. And I think that we kind of do have an Abilene paradox here, because people got there and realized, I made a mistake. I don't want to be here. And now I can't leave.
Right. That's
What
right.
do you want to leave the audience with? I always give my guests the last word. What do you think is important for us to learn from this? If somebody's sitting there thinking, oh, that's 1978, that could never happen again, what would you say?
I would say that it can happen. It has happened. And unfortunately, it will continue to happen, which is why it's important for us to understand that as followers, we have power. So when we think of followers, we think that they're powerless, they're mindless, and that's not true. There's 3 things that I want to remind people to do, to recognize that, when you see that behavior, you're like, did I see that? Did they really say that? It's true. And once you recognize it, refute it. Definitely avoid it. Walk away from it. Whatever you must do at that time that is safe, of course. Safety is number 1. To refute it. I definitely would recommend that. And then what happens after you've had these kinds of experiences with toxic leaders. You're left feeling bamboozled. You're left feeling like, wow, how did I miss that? You have to go through this period of restoration and restore yourself, right? There's this self-healing that must take place. That you have to restore yourself, your family, the organizations need to be restored. So all of those things take place. And then I would say, I've heard it most in business settings, when you're in meetings and there will be people who will say, we got to get everybody to drink the Kool-Aid. Or they say, don't drink that Kool-Aid.
Yep.
That is extremely insensitive. So it's important for us, now that I have conducted the research and you have read the book and others have heard me speak, to not allow people to just turn something that is so tragic into sheer colloquialism. Just a saying. One, it wasn't Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid, grape flavored Flavor Aid. And two, there were 918 lives lost. 75% of those were African American and 1/3 were children. So we must never forget that that saying minimizes the suffering of people, 918 lives. And we cannot allow that. So for me, I never allow anyone to just say that without educating them, but we do need to get to a point where we don't use that saying ever.
Wow, that's interesting because you do hear that term and it is a colloquialism, and we all know that that's where it came from. And so you're right to have that insensitivity to just say, don't drink the Kool-Aid. It's so much deeper than that.
It is.
Dr. Edmonds, I want to thank you for coming on Tabernacle Talks. And we're certainly going to look forward to you next week when we're on the call with our audience, because I'm sure they're going to have tons of questions they want to ask you. And I'm looking forward to that as well. So I just want to thank you for giving us this private time up and personal so we could talk about your book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And this has been great. I love sharing about my research. So this is wonderful for me, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To our family, friends, and viewing audience, we say thank you. This year has been phenomenal. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Pierce Mobley, lovingly known as Dr. Michelle. And this year, I can honestly say for the creators and crew of Tabernacle Talks, we were pushing ahead pretty frantically. But as we prepare for today's show, it became obvious we needed to look back at our accomplishments so that we could understand our journey and the successes that got us to this point. When we set out to create Tab Talks, we wanted to talk about the human condition, so we started capturing snippets from our everyday lives and started filming it. We knew we were living history, and we wanted to capture it in a meaningful way. We knew there were great stories, so we just sat down and started telling them. Tab Talks was created by me and my collaborative partner, Curtis A. Welch Jr. We both shared a passion for media and creating a space to communicate with the world. We had no idea what to anticipate for the show. Needless to say, we've been overwhelmed by the response from everyone. We'd like to look back at the shows that highlighted people and their pain. Experience shows us that not everyone lives a glamorous life, and if more people could see the challenge of just plain everyday living, we would create a framework that allows everyone to share their experience in order to help someone else. In our show, Finding Christ, Frank's story, it was important for us to illuminate how your life circumstances can be changed in a minute. We knew that loneliness impacts not only mental health, but physical health. Frank showed how life can throw you some serious curveballs, but you can always get up. His faith did not allow for failure and provided a testimony that you can overcome adversity if you believe you can. We then moved to Crystal's story and the power of she. Crystal showed the power of being a phenomenal woman when faced with adversity. While we know from our research that 24 people are victims of rape, physical violence, or in Crystal's case, stalking, she took power over her situation in her life so that she could show that other people can do it too.
Things began to really take a turn. And, you know, you have the Trinity, you got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I think for me, it was me, my oldest, and my baby boy. And the more that I began to seek God and began to pray and try to cover us, the more power I felt like I had to just say, you know what, this is what it is. Because it was getting to a point where I could no longer conceal what it was that I had been trying to hide.
During the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, we witnessed a world stand still at the inhumane way in which he was killed. We discussed how anger can bring out the inhumanness in people, contributing to rash and impaired decision-making. We wanted to show that there are people who, when faced with anger, practice restraint. Yes, there are people who choose resolve over anger because had they not made that choice, they would not have lived to tell their stories. We didn't just focus on people in pain. We also wanted to tell stories about problems and their solutions. This year, we witnessed one too many stories about citizens and their interactions with law enforcement, some of which were deadly. Before George Floyd, there was Breonna Taylor, and before Breonna Taylor, there was Botham Jean. We sought to educate the public on their rights and responsibilities in dealing with law enforcement. While we are not suggesting the lives that we're taking did anything to provoke incidents of violence, we wanted to do what we could to start and continue this conversation in our homes about the danger for Blacks.
The Tabernacle family has asked me to discuss the question, what should you do if you're stopped, if you're arrested, if you're interviewed? We call it interrogated by the police. This is certainly a hot and relevant topic for such a time as this. This has always been an issue. It always has been, but I believe it's been illuminated by social media, which allows us to capture instances in real time that involve the police stopping us and arresting us and abusing our communities. I know there are a lot of people who don't like social media. They don't think very highly of it, but I must say that it certainly is a catalyst for our exposing ill behavior against our community.